All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning. My name is Olya Weekley. I'm with Tucson Audubon Society. I'm the Applied Conservation Project Manager. I also lead the Nest Box program for Tucson Audubon. And I'm joined today by Samantha Brewer. She is the Volunteer Engagement Coordinator for the National Phenology Network. So thank you so much for joining me today. We will start out with a little bit of an introduction to Lucy's Warblers and then head straight into our presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right. Oops, that's the wrong one. Share screen, there it is. Much better. All right. So I just wanted to do a quick overview. We're mostly familiar with who Lucy's Warblers are, but for anyone who is just starting out they have their nest box for the first time, or they don't have a nest box and they just love birds, want to contribute to this community science project. This is a quick introduction to Lucy's Warblers. Lucy's warblers are one of only 2 cavity nesting warblers in the whole of North America. They're also the only warbler to nest in the very lowland environment and some of the driest parts. Lucy's warblers have a pretty small distribution range. They winter on the west coast of Mexico. And beginning about mid-March, which we're almost about mid-March, they arrive into Arizona, which lies in the heart of their breeding range. eBird, actually, which is another community science database, their observations show that Lucy's warblers are expanding their range into the surrounding tips of other states. So we have a little bit into Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and California as well. But the heart of their breeding range is still Arizona. So here's what to look out for when you're heading outside looking for them this spring. They're small and gray, so that doesn't really help catching them up in the canopy of a tree, but this is what to look out for. They're about the size of a burden, if you know what a burden looks like, about 4 inches, and they don't have a yellow head like a burden would, but the males do have this really cute little rusty cap, and it's most visible when they puff it up with excitement, or if you're looking at them and they tilt their head and you can see the top of their head. Females have a slight cap usually, or they have no cap. They also have a rusty rump, which is the space right above the tail here. And these field marks are good when you're out birding and trying to find them, but more often than not, you will actually hear them before you see them. And you might not even see them if the tree is fully leafed out and they're up in the tree somewhere. So I wanted to also play you a recording of what they actually sound like. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So it's a set of 3 trills, 2 or 3 trills, and it varies in pitch and speed. So when you're out there, try to listen for them. They're starting to sing. Shortly, they will be all over the place. Merlin is a really good app that helps with sound ID. So and it's free to use, so you can download that to help you identify them in the field. Lucy's warblers breed most often in dense lowland riparian mesquite bosques or woodlands. They are also found in Palo Verde, ironwood, cottonwood, galleries, but their strongest ties are to mesquite trees, and they use them for foraging, they use them for nesting. So that's something that we keep seeing in their preferences. Lucy's warblers also overwinter in Mexico in a very similar lowland riparian habitat. And some Lucy's do stick around during winter with us as well. Lucy's will spend almost all of their time in the tree canopies, foraging. So that's where you'll find them when you go out looking for them. I have not heard my first Lucy's yet. They're not back into my nest box in my backyard just yet, but I am starting to get reports that Lucy's warblers are trickling in already. So I wouldn't be surprised if anyone on the call has already heard or seen one this season. So several years ago, Tucson Audubon did a study on nest box preference, which Lucy's warbler nest box preference. So previously Lucy's were not known to use nest boxes, but Tucson Audubon conducted an experiment where we tried different designs, and we came up with the winner of this experiment, the one that kept being used by Lucy's warblers over 70% of the time. And this is the triangle nest box. This nest box mimics their natural nests found in peeling bark or splitting branches of mesquite trees. Last year, I was talking to Paula Redinger, who's also on this call, and she has had Lucy's warblers nesting in her triangle box for several years now. And we were kind of just talking about how it seems like every year Lucy's warblers are timing their nesting, their start of nest building, their start of egg laying. And it seems like they're timing it with mesquite tree leaf out and blooming stages. So anecdotally, we thought that that might be the case, but we didn't have that data to support our feelings, our observations that we had. So what we decided to do, and Paula, you did an amazing job spearheading this joint project. We partnered with the National Phenology Network to make this new project called Lucy Tree Project, or Project Lucy Tree, where participants, community scientists can submit their observations of the mesquite tree phenology stages. So meaning that stage, okay, now it's leaf out, young leaves, things like that. Samantha will go over these in a little bit. And also, if you have a nest box, which you don't have to have for this project to participate, you could also make observations of Lucy's warblers and seeing, okay, now they're building the nest. Okay, now it looks like they are sitting on the eggs. So things like that could contribute to our understanding and have the data to back up our guesses. So this is where, not guess, but a hypothesis, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Samantha, who has a lot of really cool information for us about the project itself and how you can get involved. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen. And you should be all good to start sharing as well.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today. Once again, my name is Samantha Brewer, and I'm the Volunteer Engagement Coordinator for the USA National Phenology Network. I'll go ahead and share my screen as well. I think it's got the right one up now.
Looks good.
today, what I'm going to talk about is, how you guys can participate in this community science effort to help Tucson Audubon be able to better understand that relationship between what's going on with the phenology of the mesquite trees and also the phenology of the Lucy's warblers. So today, what I'm going to go over, here's an outline. We're going to talk a little bit, actually, Olya already talked a little bit about the background of the research. I'm going to talk a little bit about the USA National Phenology Network and our community science program, Nature's Notebook. I'll talk to you guys about how you can get started with Project Lucy Tree, let you know about some training materials and other resources available, because with community science projects, it's important to have specific protocols and make sure everyone's on the same page, especially with phenology, because when I say it on a webinar, it's like, oh yeah, obviously that's a flower. And then you get out there and you look at the trees and it's like, oh wait, it's a little bit more complicated than we're actually thinking. So we've got some resources for you guys. And then I'll make sure to have some time at the end for questions and answers. If you want to in the chat, let us know where you're here from. I'm sure there's a lot of Tucson residents here, but there may be people from other places in Arizona or elsewhere. So we'd love to hear about where you're from. So a little bit about the USA National Phenology Network. So who we are is we collect, store, and share phenology data and information. We've been super busy this season. Some of you may have seen us on the news because in the eastern United States, spring conditions have been much earlier than usual. Here in Arizona, actually, we've kind of have a late spring happening, but there's a lot of people talking about the early spring conditions that have been happening in the eastern United States, and in some cases, it's been the earliest spring in 40 years. So you may have heard of us, and if you haven't, you may still see us pop up on your feeds or in the news once in a while right now. It's pretty exciting. But we kind of consider ourselves the stewards of the data. All the data that is collected through Nature's Notebook, and I'll talk about that in a moment, is freely available for anyone, any researcher to be able to do, and that's really important to us to be able to have that data available. Then we also have some people or some researchers, exactly like with Tucson Audubon, where they have specific research questions that we can reach out to the community and collect data and help them answer those questions. So us as a network, we're the USA National Phenology Network, and then Nature's Notebook is our program that people can use to collect the data, right? So our staff here in Tucson at our office is 8 people. So we can't go all over the United States and collect phenology data. And most researchers can't do that, right? When you're getting long-term data on a huge scale like this. So we rely on volunteer scientists or community scientists to help collect this data so that we can understand better what's going on around us. With Nature's Notebook, this is actually outdated. We hit 30 million records last year, so 30 million phenology records have been collected with Nature's Notebook, with over 22,000 different observers across the United States at over 17,000 different sites. So this is just kind of showing where some of those hot spots of data collection are happening. Obviously, when there's more people, we have like more data in those areas, but we have pretty good distribution across the United States, which is really exciting. And so I mentioned that word phenology a lot. Some of you may be familiar with the term phenology, and some of you may be hearing it for the first time. And phenology is a funny term because it's one that not everybody knows the exact word and what it means, but most people know the concept. So what phenology is, it's basically the study of the seasonal changes of plants and animals, that especially when they have a cyclical nature that happens year after year after year, right? So when we think about spring, we often think about flowers blooming. In the summer, some of those trees then will put out their leaves in the summer. In the autumn, they're getting ready to go dormant, so the leaves will change color, and then they fall off and are dormant in the wintertime to come back and bloom again in the spring. Animals also have phenology, right? So when we think about birds, you often think about you'll have migrating species. So in the spring, they'll come back up north. They'll establish their territories. They'll build their nests, lay their eggs, feed their young, grow up a little bit, and then get ready for their migration back south. And then they'll do that year after year as well. And there's different ways that people will track these plant and animal life cycles, right? Humans, especially indigenous people in the United States, have been doing this for centuries, and their survival depends on knowing what's going on in the cyclical changes. Some of us might not be aware of the changes, but sometimes we're like, oh, I just get really excited in the springtime, and especially like when the orange trees are blossoming and you walk by them and you have that sweet smell. So sometimes there's events that we're excited about, and different people have different ways of tracking it. So if you want to put in the chat, like, what are ways that you sometimes track plant and animal life cycles via either like a nature journal or a phenology wheel, or just really enjoying the seasons around you, or some of you may already use Nature's Notebook, you can go ahead and put that in the chat as well. So how to get, oops, I have a different logo up there, but steps for getting started with Project Lucy Tree. I'm going to talk about this in great detail, but the first thing you're going to do is create a Nature's Notebook account. You're going to join the group Project Lucy Tree. You're going to create your own personal site, and what your site is basically, it's going to be your research site where you're going to be looking at the phenology of the mesquite and the Lucy's warblers. You're going to add Lucy's warblers and the mesquite tree to your site, and then you're going to record data on the Lucy's warblers and the mesquite tree that you're going to be following. So the first step that you're going to take to participate in this project is to create a Nature's Notebook account. You can do this in a couple of ways. For one, if you happen to have your phone nearby, you can go to the Google Play or iPhone Apple Store. And you can download the Nature's Notebook app, and you'll see our little goldfinch sprig here. You can download the app, and it'll prompt you to make an account, right? So you'll create a username and an email address and a password so that you'll have your account for collecting your data. It will then prompt you if you're like creating your own site or if you're joining a group. For joining Project Lucy Tree, you're going to join a group. And you can search for your group name, or you can search for Project Lucy Tree. You'll see this search bar up here at the top, and you can just type in Project Lucy Tree, and then you can click join. I wasn't able to show it on here because I was already a part of it. So here's my Project Lucy Tree right here. And so you'll be able to join that group. Then what you're going to do is you're going to add a personal site. So adding a personal site, once again, that's going to be your study site that has your mesquite tree that you're going to observe, and that will also hopefully have some Lucy's warblers that you'll observe as the season progresses. It'll bring up a map so that you can show where your site is, and that's really important because that ties your phenology data to climate data, because it's not like the plants and animals are just like randomly going through these changes. These changes are often due to environmental cues that they're sensing around them. And so that makes sure that the data that you collect is accurate for your location and what's happening with the like abiotic factors or climatic factors around you. And so to create a site, it's going to be right down here, and then it's going to be found here in your personal sites. When you're selecting a site, some of you may have mesquite trees in your backyard that are easy to get to. Some of you may have a mesquite tree that's perhaps on the way to work that you want to observe, or at your favorite park that you go to regularly. What's really important when creating your site is that it's convenient to get to. I'm going to talk about that in a bit because it's important that you can visit it regularly. It's representative of what's going on around you, if it's in an urban area, or if you do have a site where you go out into the field often. You want to make sure there's kind of a uniform habitat and also an appropriate size. If you're like brand new to this and you have a ton of gumption, and you're like, I'm going to add all these 15 mesquites in this grove. Yes, that's really nice, but it might be difficult for you getting started. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of trees to pay attention to at once. So I always recommend people start small with maybe 1 or 2. And then if you want to continue next year, you can always add more. After you add plants, after you have created your site, you're going to want to add a Lucy's warbler to your site. So if you're in the app, there's this tab up here that says plants and animals, and then you can add plants and animals, and you can then search for Lucy's warbler. It'll have a search bar at the top. You can search for Lucy's warblers, and it'll let you have the chance to add that bird. And so with Lucy's warblers, you might not always see a Lucy's warbler at your site, but now you know it's going to include that in your site that you can add data for Lucy's warblers. And then what you're going to do is add a mesquite to your site. So once again, what we're trying to learn is a little bit more about the phenology of the mesquite trees and their relationship with Lucy's warblers. With Nature's Notebook, there's over 1,700 now, I believe, plants and animals that you can choose from. We don't have every single plant and animal in existence. That would not be super reasonable, especially in the United States. But we are always adding new species for people to observe. And we have 5 different, mesquite options for you guys. The 3 that are really common in town, these 3 native mesquites, velvet mesquite is one that you're able to add, honey mesquite and screwbean mesquite. These ones are all native mesquites that we see around. And these are the ones that I'll go through in more detail with like kind of identification and the phenology. And we've got photo guides that we can share with you after this talk is done. And then there's also one that says mesquite. It's Prosopis juliflora. I'm not sure how common that one is around town. It's not one I'm super familiar with. But also in town especially, there are tons of Chilean and Argentine hybrids of mesquite. Or even if you're just not comfortable with identifying your mesquite tree, you can also add mesquite with the Prosopis species. So just at the genus level, you're like, I know it's a mesquite, I just don't know exactly what one. You can still record the phenology data. Just make sure when you do so, you don't want to get it confused with the other one that the common name is just mesquite. And you'll see it says Prosopis species when you go into the scientific name, and it has this kind of fluffy mesquite as the picture. Mine is called courtyard because my mesquite is the one that's in the courtyard where I'm living.
Hey, Samantha, we have a quick question, if that's okay. Paula is asking about the species name for velvet mesquite. Is it velutina or is it juliflora?
Oh, you know what? That might have been a typo. I believe it is velutina. Yep, I believe you're correct with that one. I think I had a typo with that one when I was putting the names over. But yes, you are correct with that one.
Good catch, Paula. Thank
you.
Yes,
Very good catch. It is here, but I didn't get it here. But yep, velutina. All right. If you're already a Nature's Notebook observer and you have your yard already that maybe you've been observing milkweeds in, or if you maybe had an oak tree that you've been observing, you can add Lucy's warbler and a mesquite to your current site if there's a mesquite there that you haven't been observing yet. But also with your personal sites, you can create a new site just for your Lucy's warblers and mesquites as well. So then, now that you have your research site and you've identified your mesquite tree that you'd like to observe and you've added your Lucy's warbler, the next thing you want to do is collect data. Now with Nature's Notebook, the way our program works is you're actually going to be monitoring your same tree. So you entered your mesquite tree that you're observing, and that's the tree that you're going to be observing throughout the year. And the way you make observations of these seasonal changes is by basically answering yes or no questions with what you're seeing on your mesquite tree. So when you go out and look at your mesquite and you have your data sheet or your app out, what you're entering is, do you see young leaves on your mesquite, yes or no? Do you see leaves? Do you see colored leaves, falling leaves, flowers, open flowers? Is it releasing pollen? We have research going on right now with pollen that's out there. They're not looking at mesquite specifically, but if you want to, you can, or if you see fruits or ripe fruits. For Project Lucy Tree, like if you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of different life stages and I don't really want to worry about them all, what we're really concerned with or really focusing on are the young leaves, the leaves, and the flowering of the mesquites. So it's really okay if you just focus on those aspects of your mesquite. If you want to have a little bit more if you want to add more phenophases as the year progresses, or you just really want to get started with all of them, you're welcome to do that too. But it's okay if you skip the steps with the colored leaves or the fruits and just focus on the young leaves and the leaves. And then what is also available to you is we do have definitions for what this means. So like, what is a young leaf versus a leaf, right? So a young leaf is when the leaves have started to unfold. Usually they're a little bit lighter, but they've come out of their leaf buds, and you can see the attachment for the petiole to the tree, and they're just not fully mature leaves yet. But you can also see, if you see young leaves, then you obviously see leaves on your tree too. So you would also say, like, if you're out there and the leaves have just started coming out, you say, yes, I see young leaves, and yes, I see leaves on my mesquite tree. But maybe you don't see flowers yet. If you don't see any flowers, no for flowers, and definitely no for open flowers. And just so you know as well, some of these phenophases can be overlapping, right? So you may see leaves at the same time that you see young leaves. And same with colored leaves. When in the fall, when the leaves are turning brown, you would report, yes, I see colored leaves, and yes, I'm seeing leaves at the same time. You may also see leaves and flower buds, so you can see those at the same time as well. And like with your mesquites, you'll say like, okay, no, I don't see flowers, but now, yes, I see flowers, but they're not open. So I would say, yes, I see flowers, but no, I don't see open flowers. But then when those yellow flowers open and you can see the reproductive parts inside, then you'd say, yes, I do see open flowers. So this is just showing that all these phenophases are not necessarily independent of each other. Who knows, you could have a tree where you see young leaves and you see flowers, and maybe some of them got pollinated and you see some fruits at the same time too. So you can see multiple phenophases that are overlapping at the same time. And once again, really for the focus of this project, we want to see when are we seeing those young leaves appearing, and when there are those open flowers appearing, or when are, when the flowers, excuse me, not pollen release, but when the flowers are appearing and when they are opening. Also, if you're like not super comfortable with using the mobile app, you can also print out a data sheet from our website. You can actually print out a data sheet and you can manually enter data if you'd like, especially if you go out into the field. Our mobile app does work without Wi-Fi, but you can go out in the field and bring paper data sheets and then manually enter the data on your computer as well. So you're not limited to just having to use the mobile app. You can also enter data manually. And so what's also really important is because, once again, we want to see like what's going on with the phenology. When are the seasonal changes happening in the mesquite? You want to start going out and recording that data, and you want to be visiting your site and your trees regularly. And this is because when you go out there, if you went out right now, maybe you have a dormant mesquite and you say, no, I don't see leaves, and it kind of seems like it might be boring, but then if you waited a month and you didn't go out there and you saw leaves, that's a huge gap of when you didn't see leaves and when you do see leaves. So if you go out at least weekly, then you can say, no, I don't see leaves. No, I don't see leaves. Yes, now I do see leaves. And it gives a much more accurate story of when leaves started appearing on the mesquite trees. Same with the warblers, right? So if you go out there, no, I don't hear any warblers. No, I don't hear any warblers. Now I hear warblers. If you have a month between, you don't know exactly when they arrived, but the more regularly you go out, the more accurate of a picture you get. So this is showing, once again, that records data. For those phenophase definitions on the mobile app, you'll see a little I next to each of those phenophases next to the yes or no. And that's where you're like, wait, what's an open flower again? Or is this a young leaf or not? We do have definitions for each species so that you can know if like, yes, I saw a young leaf, or no, I didn't see a young leaf. But even then, if you're just really not comfortable with it, that's why we have these question marks. And I always tell people, embrace the question mark, because it's okay if you're not sure, especially because if you go out the next week, maybe it's a little bit more obvious. You can go back and correct your previous data, but putting a question mark does not negatively affect the data in any way. And it still shows that someone was there observing. What you'll also see is like when you enter leaves or flowers, you'll have the option to be able to enter abundance, like how many flowers there are. And it would not be very reasonable for us to say, like, go out and count the exact number of mesquite catkins that are on that tree. That would be horrible, and like, no one can do that, right? But we have kind of a range that you can select if you're comfortable doing so. Oh, I see less than 3 flowers. Oh, I see 3 to 10 flowers, 11 to 100, 101 to 1,000. 1,001 to 10,000, or more than 10,000. So it kind of gives the idea of the abundance of flowers as well, so that you can capture maybe when the peak flowering has occurred, and also like as leaves are coming in, you'll be able to kind of get that curve of seeing the abundance of these different phenophases. Once again, though, when you're just learning Nature's Notebook, it's also okay to say not sure. It'll give you the option of not sure. Doesn't negatively affect the data in any way. And as you're observing your mesquite through the years, as you get more comfortable with it and get to know it, you might also get more comfortable in being able to put in those abundance estimates. And so here it is once again, right? So if you're putting in like what percentage of the flowers are open, with the mesquite, they have those catkins. And so you're kind of looking at what percentage of them are actually going to be open on your tree, right? When they first start opening up, maybe it'll be a really low percentage, right? Less than 5%. And then it goes up to 5 to 24 as the year progresses, all the way up to like maybe 75 to 94% or 95% more of the flowers. So you can do that peak flowering. And then you'll see it go down as you're not reporting flowers anymore as they get pollinated and transition to that fruit phenophase. So I did a little test your skills. You guys can do this in the chat. I put the definitions here for this mesquite and I focused on the leaves and the flowers. But if you went outside and last week it was just a totally brown mesquite, but oh, look, we're starting to see some activity on it. What would you report yes to on if this is what you saw, right? Do you see young leaves? Do you see leaves? Do you see flowers or flower buds? And do you see open flowers? So I'll give you guys a minute in the chat to kind of practice. And even if you're really not sure, you can embrace the question mark and you can put a question mark if you would like to. Because I did like this picture a lot because there was one little tricky green spot on there. I'll give you guys, let me see what we've got here. I see young leaves. Oh, I see a lot of yep, I see some young leaves. Yes, exactly. So for this one, if I was to go out and see this, I would say, yes, I see young leaves on this mesquite. If I see young leaves, I would also say yes to seeing leaves because it has like, you can see the petiole, that attachment there. So it is still a leaf. So it's showing, yes, I see leaves. Yes, I see young leaves. And also, looks like there's a little catkin right here. So I would also say yes to flowers. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this one. This is one where I would honestly put a question mark, but I'm pretty sure that that's a little catkin right there that's just starting to form. But I would say no to open flowers. Those are definitely not open. And I need to go back here. There we go. So I would say yes to young leaves, leaves, and flowers. All right, and then there's this one here as well, right? So here we have another mesquite branch. And I would ask, do you see young leaves? Do you see leaves? Do you see flowers? And do you see open flowers? So I'll give you guys a moment in the chat to look at this one. Yep, I see leaves, I see flowers and open flowers. I see leaves and flowers, leaves and flower buds. Yep. Excellent. Yes. For this one, I would say no to young leaves. All of these leaves look pretty mature, so I would say no to young leaves. I would say yes to leaves. There's definitely some mesquite leaves there, and I definitely see a lot of flowers and flower buds there. And also, if you look at this one right here, you can see that there's also a yes to open flowers because you can see the reproductive parts in these flowers. These ones are still buds. I would say no to open flowers for this one. This one, I like this picture a lot because this one is a question mark for the open flowers. I would not be sure. I would not feel confident with the open flowers in this one, but this one is definitely yes for open flowers. So this one, at least for abundance of open flowers, I would say not sure because there are some big details and I wouldn't know the tree enough to feel comfortable with that one. But some of you guys might be like, oh my gosh, what are you talking about? Clearly these are open or not. And that's great if you're comfortable with that. And then also you're going to record data on your Lucy's warblers. When you're entering your data and you're looking at plants and animals and you see your Lucy's warbler on there, if the Lucy's warblers aren't there, all you have to do is click not present and it will put no for everything in the database. So if there's no Lucy's warblers present, you just say no present, not present. But if you see or hear any Lucy's warblers, you say present, and then it will prompt you to let us know what's going on with your Lucy's warblers. And so there's lots of different phenophases that you can choose. If you see live individuals and you say yes or no, and even if you're like, I think it's a Lucy's warbler, but I'm still learning Oh, we got that friendly question mark right there. So then next time you go back, you're like, oh wait, that was definitely a Lucy's Warbler. You can go back and fix it. Maybe you never will, but at least we still know it's out there, and at least it still lets you know what you want to practice. Do you see your Lucy's Warblers feeding? Do you see them vocalizing with calls or a song? And do you see them actually singing? Because sometimes they'll just be chipping out there, but you might hear them singing. If you see them doing territorial behavior, once again, if you're not sure if it's territorial behavior or not, you can leave that blank, or you can put a question mark. If you see any courtship, if you actually see some copulation, and then there's also nest building. So the nest building, once again, if you have a Lucy's Warblers nest box and you see them building, you're like, oh yes, you can feel very confident usually that you can see them nest building. But even if they're only carrying nesting material, and you can see that right here in the definition, if they're either you see them constructing the nest, or even if they're carrying nesting material, you count that as nest building. You can say whether or not you have an occupied nest, whether or not you have a nest box, and then if there's any nestlings, fledged young, or even if you found a dead individual, that could still be really important. Individuals at a feeding station, if you have a feeder in your area and you see them at the feedings at your feeder, you can enter that data as well. If you don't have a feeder, you don't have to count that. You can just like skip that question. I don't think this one counts as the nest box, but you can put in the corner or in the comments, excuse me, you can enter that you have them at a nest box. All right, so you went outside, you've got your mesquite tree, and you see, oh, this looks like it might be a female, right? You see this lovely lady, right? So what would you put, which phenophases would you say yes to if you saw this individual out on your tree? And you can put that in the comments. Yeah, oh, I like the enthusiasm. Yes, you would see nest building, and you would also see live individuals, right? So you would say yes for live individuals. You can even put in the number of live individuals. So you can say like, I saw one live individual. If you're out on your tree and you see a couple of them, you can say that you saw two, but you will have the option to put in the number of individuals. Same with occupied nest. An occupied nest, if you see one nest, or if perhaps there's two nests in your tree. And also with number of nestlings, you can put in the number of nestlings that you observe. Yeah, should be, hopefully, should be a live individual. But you can put that information in there, especially with dead nestlings or fledglings. If something did happen to them, that's still really important information to be able to include. If you've got fledged young, right, you've been watching all those nestlings, and that's why it's important to go out regularly, right? You've got nestlings, and now they've fledged. The more often you go out and make those observations, the more accurate that timing of when they're doing these different phenophases, especially also with what's going on with your mesquite tree. And there it was, live individuals and nest building. So special considerations for mesquite, they can be really tricky to identify. I've always been trained as a bird person. I'm learning plants. Oh man, if you were like, oh, what mesquite tree is this? I'm like, that's a good question. The one in my yard is Prosopis species, because I really don't know and I'm not confident enough to do it. Usually when I have a grove of like velvet mesquite, I'm like, oh yeah, clearly these are all velvet. Screwbean mesquite is my favorite, because if there's one seed on there, I know exactly what I'm looking at. But they can be difficult to identify. This was just a great picture I saw, because these are screwbean mesquite leaves. And I remember because screwbean mesquite have the cute, tight little beans, and so they've got the cute little leaves. Velvet mesquite has like lots of leaflets on the leaves, so it's like nice and velvety is what I like to think of. And then the honey mesquite has big, I think of like big, wide, slow, like dripping honey. So you have big, wide leaves. But mesquite are of course complicated, especially with especially with so many weird hybrids and things like that. I just don't have the identifications for like every single possibility out there. So if you're not comfortable, totally okay to do at the genus level. And just so you know, also some Lucy's warblers could potentially nest in species other than a mesquite tree. If you don't have a mesquite tree, but you have like an acacia or a palo verde and you still want to participate, you could just create your site and only add Lucy's warblers and just enter like, did I see any Lucy's warblers in my yard today? That's totally fine. If you're like, oh, there's a mesquite tree like across the street over there, but I'm not comfortable going over there, but I have a palo verde over here and I just want to record its phenology as well, you can totally add a different tree that's in your yard. Some of you may have a nest box in an acacia. You could totally add your acacia as well. If you have a nest box, it's not a mesquite tree. If you want to, in your site details, you could include the distance to the nearest mesquite tree, because that could be useful information when thinking about the other trees these Lucy's warblers are nesting in. If it's not in a mesquite tree, is it close to a mesquite tree at least? Is it still foraging in the mesquite tree? So there's a lot of details that you can add in the comments that Tucson Audubon will be able to see. How am I doing on time here? Oh, good. Okay. And so I talked about the app a little bit, but you can do a lot of details when you go on the naturesnotebook.org website. You can down here, do I have it circled? Yes. You can edit your site if you want to add details about, like, my mesquite is in town. Is it a watered mesquite or not, right? Because a mesquite that's getting watered might behave differently than one that's out in the field that's not getting watered. So you can kind of add details about that so that we can tease apart, like, kind of those variables. But you can do that in your site details. You can manage your plants and your animals here, your other sites. If you participate in any other local phenology programs in the area, you can choose between the different sites that you observe here. And so here's where you can add details, like what development is around, if there's a paved road around, anything like that that you would like to add. In the comments, if you want to say, like, I have a nest box, or if you're just close to mesquite trees or there's no mesquite trees near you, you can include that as well. And there's add or edit plants. If you're adding a plant, I kind of told you how to, like, I think that adding plants on the app is a little bit easier than on the website, but you can also, if you want to add more details about your plant, instead of just like, oh, it's a mesquite, here's where you can add, like, if you want to change the nickname, if you have multiple mesquites, like mine was called Courtyard because that's the one that's in our courtyard. If it's watered, if it's fertilized. Mesquites are perfect flowers, so they're not going to be one of the ones that have male or female plants if you happen to know when it's planted. But it really is okay either way if you don't have those details. It's just another option that you have. Training materials and resources. If you look over here, she's got this observer certification course. You can take our observer certification course. It's completely free, but it goes over all of this that I just said in a lot more detail, especially when you're thinking about, okay, well, how do I estimate how many flowers are on my mesquite? How do I use the app? All of those details are in there. We also have a PDF for a botany primer. If you're like, I do birds all the time and I don't know anything about plants, like me. The botany primer is really good at teaching you some basic biology, especially in the context of phenophases and phenology and what you're actually seeing and what's happening as your plants change through the seasons. Oh, and once again, we have that observer certification course where you can learn a little bit more about making the process and what phenology is and how to identify phenophases, and there's little quizzes, and you can start and stop it whenever you want, but that's an option for you as well. And there's also, so with Project Lucy Tree, this sort of local phenology program is what's called a personal site network, meaning all of you have all your sites out there that you're collecting data on. There's also local phenology programs where you'll have, like, an area, usually with a local phenology leader, where people all come together and you have multiple people visiting, like, the same mesquite trees. So if you have a park or an arboretum and you want to be participating and you want to bring in volunteers so that you're not the one who's responsible for always checking, you can manage your volunteers so that you have people regularly coming to visit the plants. You can actually create a local phenology program where you can add mesquite and you can add Lucy's warblers and you can have multiple volunteers participating. If you want more information about this, I would love to be able to help you out. So send me an email and I can help you get you started. With local phenology programs, we also have multiple resources, such as we have an online certification course, which is basically like helping you through the process of a develop. Some of you may like, oh yeah, I developed programs and managed volunteers for a long time. If you're new to it, we have a great course to help get you started so that you can have a successful program for several years. We have program planning resources. We help with strategies for volunteer recruitment and retention, and a community of practice with, like, monthly calls where you can communicate with other local phenology leaders across the country. So just as a recap, to join Project Lucy Tree, you'll want to create a Nature's Notebook account, add your site and your Lucy's warbler and your mesquite. You can add details about your site, take advantage of some of our training materials so you can collect accurate data, record your observations at least once a week as possible. And when you're thinking about the timing of that, you kind of want to start around early February. But right now is fine too, because the Lucy's warblers are coming in. But when you're thinking about next year too, at least start in around the early February. And then when the Lucy's warblers have gone, it's okay to take a break. You don't have to keep coming back until you're ready again for the Lucy's warblers to come back for the next season. And in the next season, what's cool is you'll still be doing that same tree. So then you'll get to start seeing the patterns of what's going on with the climate and what's going on with your trees and your birds. But the most important step is to have fun and enjoy making your observations. I've had a lot of fun working with Nature's Notebook and making my own observations. I was never really a plant person, but as I get to know my plants, they're actually really cool and they have a lot of little individual nuances to them. And so it's really fun when I'm like, oh yeah, that's a flower. And I get out there and I'm like, oh, is that a flower? But learning about all those little life stages of your plants and your Lucy's warblers, like really paying attention to what they're doing. It's a really cool opportunity to do that. And I'm really glad you're all here and interested in participating. And I really hope that you enjoy doing it as well. And if you need help getting started, you can email either Olya or I. But yeah, right now that's the end and I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much, Samantha. This is so cool. All of this, the recording, our contact information, and some of the documents that can help you in this project will be attached in the follow-up email. So don't, rush to write down our information or anything like that. But I just wanted to say, don't be intimidated by this process. It's the setup is just a one-time thing, and the rest of it is just, figuring out, use this presentation as a resource to do your first few observations, and then you'll get in the groove of things and it'll become much easier, more fun. There's also levels to this project, so you can start basic, like Samantha said, and then add more detail as you go year to year. So I see Paula raised her hand. Go ahead and unmute, Paula, if you want to ask a question.
I had a couple questions actually. Last year was the first year I was tracking my mesquites using the Nature's Notebook, and I would love to get confirmation or denial of what I remember about the mesquite trees. I have the velvet mesquites, and I remember thinking it was having leaf buds, but it turned out it was actually the flowers came first. Does that sound right? If it does sound right, that might be a helpful tip for somebody who hasn't done this before.
Really great question. I am not familiar enough doing mesquite trees. Okay. There are some trees where the leaves come first, and there are some trees where the flowers come first. My mesquite has only leaves. And I haven't been paying attention enough for long enough to really notice when flowers first came or if leaves first appeared on mine. So that's a really, and if someone else knows that, like for sure, and they're like, oh my gosh, you should let plants, but yeah, I'm not sure exactly.
But the leaves on your tree now are from last spring, they're not.
I think so. I'm pretty sure that they are, yeah.
Anyway, maybe the thing to take home with that is to know that that's a possibility. Because I was seeing new leaves and then they got a little bigger and I thought, oh, that's a flower. But I have one more question. Does it make sense? I mean, could somebody be observing for Project Lucy Tree even if they don't see Lucy's warbler? My feeling was that they would still be contributing mesquite data, and for all they would know, there could be a warbler, 2 blocks away, and that would still be useful. Is that correct?
Absolutely, that is still useful. So even if you're collecting data on your mesquite, let's say a Lucy's warbler never comes, or if you just want to contribute the mesquite data, absolutely, it's still useful. And even then, like, let's say there's someone who's never heard about this project, they're doing their own project and they're collecting data on mesquite trees. All the data collected Nature's Notebook is freely available. So actually Tucson Audubon can go back to some of these species and still look at the phenology data that people have collected previously. So that's actually a really cool aspect of this project as well. The mesquite species, so Lucy's warblers, we just added, actually thanks to Paula, this year, and also that mesquite at the genus level we just added this year, so that would all be brand new. But velvet mesquite, I think we've had on there for a long time. So for example, I think the screwbean as well, but I don't recall exactly. But yes, anyway, that's a very long way of saying, like, yes, even if it's just the mesquite data, it's still really useful because you can still look at when the Lucy's warblers were coming and when the mesquites had started leaking out.
And can I confirm one other thing?
Absolutely.
So I have my backyard site that I've been doing for at least a year. And I want to make sure I understand correctly. I'm already in the Project Lucy tree, so I don't create a new personal site. What I do in my backyard already gets synced up with Lucy tree. So in this regard, it's different than the Desert Refuge project, correct?
Actually, oh, Desert Refuge, I don't think they have a personal site network the way that Project Lucy Tree does. But like the data you're collecting with Desert Refuge, which if anyone's interested in Desert Refuge, which is overwintering monarchs and milkweed in Arizona, you can contact me about that as well. They're just collecting all the monarch and milkweed data without people necessarily having to join the site. Even with this one, you don't necessarily have to join the site for it, but it's nice when we have the personal site network to help organize the data with the administrators who are looking at it. And it also helps like with that feeling of community, like, yes, you are definitely that the project, you're participating in that project. Desert Refuge is also one of our like research campaigns. So that one's funded by Desert Botanical Garden. And so this project's a little bit different than that as well. But in both cases, yes, you can create new sites. You can have like, this is my Desert Refuge site that I want to do. This is my Project Lucy site. But as long as you have a personal site and you're recording data on these species, yep, that data is going to be available to Tucson Audubon.
Thank you.
These are all great questions. Thank you for asking. I'm sure other people are having similar questions, or they come up as we go. I just also wanted to reiterate that it is important to do weekly observations, especially if you're doing Lucy's warbler observations as well, because everything happens very quick with this small little bird. So 1 week you could miss, if you don't do any observations for a month, you could miss them nesting completely. So it is important weekly at least to do some observations. I also wanted to say, if you wanted to learn more about Lucy's warblers and their phenology of what we already know, I did a presentation back in February, and I will attach it in the follow-up email as well if you wanted to watch the recording again. If you're also not sure about their phenology or what you're seeing, you can always email me and say, is it safe to say they're feeding young if this is what I'm seeing, something like that. So our email inboxes are open for any type of questions like that. If there's any other questions in here, there's a lot of really exciting comments in the chat here. If you have anything you wanted to unmute for, you can always do that. Which kitty are you talking about, Kelly? My kitty that was meowing the whole time. Oh, now I remember. Yeah, when I was giving the presentation last time, my cat was meowing the whole time, and he was really just sitting here right next to me and yelling at me until I picked him up. So you will see that when I send you the recording. But now he's asleep in the next room, and I hope he stays that way for a little more. And it's interesting to see other places that Lucy's warblers have had nests in. A horse skull? That's a new one. That is so funny. I would love to see a picture of that. The resourceful little birds. They remind me of like the house wrens and things like that that will nest in unconventional places.
Yeah, and I can say that I found a horse skull at a garage sale years ago and just hung it on a post on my patio. And one year, some wasps tried to build a nest in there, and I got rid of that. And then the next year, I saw teeny tiny birds going back and forth behind the horse skull. So I peeked in there, and my gosh, they were building a nest. And I had no idea what kind of birds they were. So I investigated and found out Lucy's warblers. And for 3 years now, they have built on that nest. And I think 2 of the years they raised 2 different broods of little birds in that horse skull. And I have a large mesquite just outside my patio wall, probably 10 to 15 feet away. So I have some pictures of it. Yes, I'll send them to you at Tucson Audubon.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, all right.
For some reason, I imagine them going into like an eye of the.
No, it's in the back of the
back?
of the skull.
I just like, oh, maybe it's like a 2 exit system like we have with the triangle walls and stuff. But I would still absolutely love to see it. That's so fun. Resource for little birds. And it's interesting, you know, you're saying there's a mesquite nearby that they're going to for feeding and things like that. And I will also include a link to our webpage where you can construct your own nest box. We sell nest boxes online that could be shipped to you. And we sell them in person at our nature shop at University Boulevard. They're just $10 to purchase. So do check us out. And it says, oh yes, Paula brings up a good comment. Remember to start observing before Lucy's arrival and before mesquites wake up. So right now is a good time to start doing this, which is good. This is going to be very fresh in our minds as I'm going to be doing the same thing with my mesquite tree. And Lucy's warbler peak nesting period is April and May. Sometimes it goes into June. So that is going to be the peak for our observations as well. And that's when we're going to see the most change with the mesquite trees. But you're welcome to make observations all year. So with that said, look at that. The time is perfect, 12 o'clock. Thank you all for being here. If there's no other questions or if something comes up later, you can email us. For now, we're gonna say happy weekend and have a great day.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.